Hello and welcome back. In the last video, we created this signup.php file and we added it in our index.php. We included the signup.php file in our index.php. And if we go over to our browser, we refreshed and click on the sign up and we saw the form being displayed, but there are no styles added to this. So what we want to do here is we want to move this text, this sub message we have here, move it to the center, and also we want to add some styles to the form and the text inside the form, and also to this button. Now to get started, we go over to our signup.php. Now inside the signup.php file, what I'll start with is here in this div that holds the sub message, I can just add a class, call it sub underscore msg or sub underscore message. So I will use this to give it a style that will center this at the middle. If you don't want to do this, you could just add an inline style and give it, or add a bootstrap class called text center. But I want to use this to give it a property to move this text to the center. Then another thing we want is, we want the parent div that holds the form, we want it to have a border, a thin border that will have color of gray. So we'll add a class inside the div, we call it sign up. So we are going to add the properties inside this sign up class. Then another thing we want to do is we want to add a class that we can use in getting access to this div and also to these input fields. So I'll call the div, or I'll call the class input underscore group. So with this, we will be able to use it to get access to this div and also to this input field inside the div. So I'll just copy that and paste it inside all the divs for all the input elements. Then we go down here as well, then we paste. Then we're going to also add a style to this div, but let's first add the CSS to these classes that we added. So we head over to our custom.css file. Then the first thing we want to add is the padding or the text align property to this class that we added here. So from here, we add dots, then we add the name of the class. So we are using the dot to get access to the class. Then the first thing we do, we add text align. So we'll say text align, and it's going to be center. It's going to place the text at the center. Then we add a padding to it. So we add a padding top of 10 pixels. Then for the right and left, we make them 0 pixels, bottom 20, and the left 0 pixels. As we know, if you are using this property padding, it starts from the top, right, bottom, and left. So it starts in a clockwise direction, top, right, bottom, left. So we've added this property to the div with this class. Then the next thing is we add the property to the div with class sign up. So we want to add a border to it and allow the div to be placed at the center. So the first thing is we add a border. So we give the border 1 pixels, then solid. We say border 1 pixels, solid. Then we want to give it a gray color, E7, E7, E7. So we've given it a border. Then the next thing is we say text align to be at the center as well. Then another property we want to add, we want to make the width, we don't want it to occupy 100 the full width. So we give it a width of 60%, because if we don't add a width, it will take up the complete or the full width of the container div. But we are adding a width of 60% to allow it to occupy just 60% of the container div. Then the next thing that we need to add, we want to make the height, we make it auto. So depending on the number of elements in the div, the height will increase based on the number of elements. Then to make the div appear at the center, we can give it a margin, and we'll say the margin or we set the margin to auto. We set the margin to auto. So this property will allow the div to be placed at the center. Now another thing, if we go back to the signup.php, we've added the properties to this. Then the next thing we want to do is we want to work on this input underscore group. So the first thing is also we're going to add a margin to this div class or this div element. Then we're going to use this input underscore group to get access to this input field. So we're going to add some properties to this input field. So we start with this. So we say dot input underscore group. We give it a margin. Margin top will be 0 pixels. The right will give it 20, the bottom 20, and the left 20 pixels. So if we head over to our browser and we see how it looks, we refresh the page, click on the sign up. Now we see that it's getting better than the way it was. Now we also want to add some properties to this input field and also to this submit button. So we go back also with this input underscore group class. So input underscore group input. So we are inside the input, the div with class input underscore group. We are getting the type input. So with that, we add some properties. The first property is height for the input field. That is, for this input field, we want to add a height of say 40 pixels. Then the next thing we want to add is the font size. That is the text that will appear in it. The font size will be 20 pixels. Then the next one is going to be the font width. Or we don't add the font, we just leave it, add just the height property and the font size property. So if we go back and we refresh, now we see that the input has increased. The height of the input field has increased. Now let's add the styles to this button. Now for the button, we are going to get it. What we want to do here is for every element with type button or with type submit, which is every element that has this property type submit, we want to add a style so they will all have the same style. So we say input type, and it's going to be equal to submit. So for every input field with type submit, we are adding this property. So say height 40 pixels, font size 20 pixels, font weight, we give it bold. Then another thing is we had add a background color. We want to give it a background color of say something like blue. I have the color, so I type it's BC3. So this is the background color. Then the text inside the button will have a color of white. And we add this property important, which will make that color to have precedence over any other color. So the color inside the input field will be white. So if we save this, then we go to back to our browser, we refresh the page and click on the button. We can see now that we've added the property to this submit button. So everywhere we have this input of type submit, it will have this property. Then another thing we need to add is we want to add a margin to this button so that to allow it move downward a bit. So we head over to our signup.php. Then in the div class, in the div with class row form group, we add a style. So an inline CSS where we're going to give it a margin. So the margin property we're going to say the top to 0 pixels, the right 10, the bottom 20, and the left 10 pixels. So we are adding this property to this div class. We go back, refresh, then we can see it has a bottom of margin of 20, then the right and the left, they also have margins. Now, one last thing that we need to change inside this is we will want to change this font. I don't really feel comfortable with this font. I want to add a different font so that it's going to be much more, it will look much more better than this. So to add a font, we go to our CSS, custom.css. Now in the body property, CSS property, where we have the background color, font size, margin and padding, we're going to add a font family. And the font family that we're going to add, which is just a simple font family, we'll add what's called Tangerine. Then we add the serif. We add the comma, then serif. So this are the font family we are adding to our body property. So by default, it's going to take this font family, except where we decide to define another font family or give another font family to a particular element. So by default, it will take this font family. We go back. Now notice we're going to see the difference. If we refresh, now we can see that it has taken another font family. And now this looks much better than the one we had before. So we've added the styles to the CSS, and we can continue in the next video to start adding or working on the validations.